Okay, students, so this week's assignment, we're going to delve into some figure drawing, which is a very exciting thing. It's one of my favorite types of drawing. It's in a lot of ways, it's really no different than any other type of drawing. You have a subject matter and you use the same tools that you've learned so far and apply them. Anything from sighting to negative space, um, all that stuff really works in the same fashion. But that being said, there are a few things that you should keep in mind. And so this little primer slideshow is just to kind of get you in the right headspace for a few of those things that might give you hangups. So the very first thing I want to talk about is proportion. And of course, your model is probably not going to even be standing up necessarily exactly like this, but it's a good thing to keep in mind. So if you can count the size of a person's height, they're approximately 8 to an 8.5 heads tall. And a good way to measure that is if you measured their head, the next head down would be pretty much right in the middle of the pectoral muscles or where the nipples would be. Two more would lead you right to the trunk of the body, right where the legs meet the trunk of the body. Two more again will take you just below the kneecaps. And two more again will get you down to the bottom of the feet or to the ankle. Let me get myself out of here so you can see better. Here's another example, and this one works pretty good. Same idea, a little more realistic drawing, but you see that the head is one, the second one takes you to the pectoral muscles, two more is right to where the legs meet the trunk, another two just below the kneecap, and another two more will take you about to where the ankles are. There's a little give and take there. Obviously everybody's proportions are slightly different, but this is a really good rule of thumb and something to keep in mind. Now we're going to start this project off by doing some gestures, and this is a very common thing in figure drawing groups and classes that you always start with warm-up gesture drawings. And I believe our gestures are 90 seconds long. I'll have to double check that, but basically what you'll want to do is set yourself up with a piece of paper, just like we did gestures before, and do some warm-up practice drawings of the model in these more dynamic poses. Now remember, with gesture drawing, you keep it loose. You don't try to draw detail. You're really just trying to capture the feeling of the pose, not so much what the model looks like. Notice this one doesn't even have a face, but really more the structure and stance and the movement of the pose itself. Once you've sort of built it up with these loose squiggly lines, just like before, tangled fishing line kind of mashed together into a form, then and only then should you start to concentrate on putting some contours around the outside. Contours are a really no-no in the beginning of a gesture drawing because that's where your proportions will become wrong. Let yourself be loose and gestural at first, and then work out proportion and your contours after. You see some more examples here. The beauty of gesture drawing really is that it comes in all different forms, and everybody sort of comes with their own, style of doing it. These fast drawings really kind of indicate, in a way, your style of drawing. But look how simple this one is, how it just describes the curve of the back of the skull, the curve of the spine, and sort of just like the length and lay of the anatomy of the legs. Just so simple, yet very, very effective in showing how this model was sitting. Or they can be much more complex and dynamic. These are some gesture drawings that really show some of the dynamic movement of the human body. Or this one that's a little more ethereal. It's almost weightless in the way that the model is placed on the page. Simple, but very effective. Great way to warm up, and we'll be doing several of those for this before this assignment. Again, with gesture drawing, just to show you a little bit how it applies, not just to the warm up of the drawing, but in your true drawing too, like a lot of times you start with a gestural sort of beginning and you use that as the underlaying of your sculpture, the thing that you start to build the more concrete lines on top of, and how these gestural hands over here end up becoming these more realistic and well drawn contour lines over here. And this one really, these volumes that are being described, these loose, light lines that just show the roundness, the curve of the back of the neck, the swoop of the shoulders, the volume of the back of the skull. And then and only then do contours start to come down more carefully and sort of are carved on top of the surface. Now with that last one being the head, I think we should start talking about a little bit about the proportions of the head. And one of the most important things to remember is eye placement. Oftentimes people are really tempted to start drawing all the details of the face before they even start with the body, and that's not the right way to do it. You really want to start simple with the head and think of it as sort of a large sort of, upside down egg shape, sort of modified. And to remember that the placement of the eyes in the face should be the exact same distance from the top of the skull as it is from the bottom of the chin. It really lays halfway between the top of your head and the bottom of your chin. And this is a common thing for people to get wrong. A lot of beginning students really focus on the facial features and they draw them too large and they really dwarf the skull and they make the skull look like it's not proper. Here we have the same student drawing another version, this time getting the proportions of the facial features correct, and here they're drawing them too large. It's a common mistake, and really it has to do with the way that we recognize faces. We look at facial features as a way to identify different human beings, and so our brain focuses on that and sort of ignores the armature in which those facial features are placed. Here, we're looking more now at the armature. Where do those facial features exist? And they exist in the anatomy of the skull, in the anatomy of the neck. It's almost better, especially in these faster drawings and these beginning drawings of figure drawing, to really just look at the planes of the face. Try to make and identify the major planes that you're seeing. And then, and only then, when you have time, start developing the facial features. And the neck. Don't forget about the neck. There's so many nice bits of anatomy that exist there. Our head isn't on a lollipop stick that just goes down into the trunk of our body, but there's nice little sloping sweeps here of the trapezius muscles. These muscles that come down here and make the little V between the collarbones. There's so many things to see and recognize when you're looking. Another thing I'd like to talk about is foreshortening. And inevitably, some form of foreshortening is probably going to happen in one of the poses that you're drawing. It's very rare that you get a person standing perfectly straight up and down right in front of you. Oftentimes when they're sitting, part of their leg is foreshortened or their arm. But really what this refers to is the way that the body appears like it gets smaller in space as it goes further away. And this one's a really extreme example. The head is really close, so it's very, very large. And then the first part, the shoulders and the first part of the trunk of the body, the upper chest, kind of stacks behind it. And then the stomach is stacked behind that. And then the lower stomach is stacked, and then the legs. And each one of these things sort of diminish in size and are also hidden by the stacks of the body that's in front. Here's another one. Oftentimes you really want to pay attention to sort of exaggerating the scale of the things that are closer to you. So for example, if the feet are closer, you want to make sure that your brain is not misrecognizing it and actually drawing it as you see it. Larger feet up front, And as things get smaller and smaller back into space, they become smaller and stacked behind those body parts. Here's a student example, and nicely done with just some, just subtle foreshortening. Parts of this leg here is kind of being foreshortened as it goes away from us in space. This part of the arm is being foreshortened as it goes away from us. Just little hints of aspects of the pose where you have to pay attention to see how those body parts go away from us. A good trick for trying to determine this is, lay your pencil like a sighting tool along aspects of the body. You can lay it down the back of the spine or down some of the where the bones would reside inside the leg or the bone inside the arm, and even just put a placement line there to kind of give you an idea of how those lines recede away in space. And again, to exaggerate and stack the body parts that you see. So here we have the skull closest to us, so that should be drawn larger. And then as the body recedes into space, the aspects of the body are stacked and diminish in size. It's a beautiful example, and just with subtle foreshortening, the torso of the body is directly in line, so there is no foreshortening there. But this arm over here is sort of going away from us in space very subtly. This part of the thigh, as it goes away from us in space, is getting smaller. This part of the calf, this thigh, the way it goes away from us in space, is drawn smaller because of the way it goes away in space. Again, just examples of foreshortening. And another here. Subtle foreshortening of the arm, subtle foreshortening of the leg. The way this part of the leg is in front of the thigh, and how those both get foreshortened. And how this part of the arm from the elbow to the shoulder is really foreshortened. It really goes away from you in space. Now, a lot of this is going to be recognizable with things like, observing negative space and or sighting. Both those things will help you determine how these things line up. Speaking of which, some examples of sighting marks on your drawing. You're more than welcome to leave these kind of marks on the page if you want to make subtle, just distinguishing markers that shows sort of the curve of the back or the placement of this part of the arm or the tilt of the head. All those things can kind of be measured with your pencil. The slope of the side of the face, the way his head's leaning to one direction. All those things are very useful. In addition, notice they have plumb lines that are perfectly vertical and or horizontal. And those things come in handy. Like you can lay your pencil straight up and down and place it at the base of the skull, and you'll notice it lines up with this part, the crook of the armpit, or where it hits the thigh here and where it hits the calf there. And once you place that line on your page, you can get your pose to line up correctly by seeing how all those parts are lining up in your same drawing. Another example, particularly if someone has sort of a contrapposto position. Most people don't stand perfectly straight up and down on both their feet, but they shift their weight onto a load-bearing leg, and that typically makes the hips go at an angle and the shoulders go at an angle. And those things can be identified just by placing your pencil along these 2 points of the shoulders and drawn on your page like so. And that'll help you capture the substance of the pose. Another nice example. And just another reminder, contrapposto. It really just refers to the term of this sort of the natural way we carry weight. And you'll notice like most figures or most people, like when they're just standing around or sitting in a chair, they're always shifting their weight from either one side of their body to the next. And a good way, a good illustration of this is if you look at this line that runs down the middle of the body, you notice that the load-bearing leg over here is all on this heel. All the weight, the center of the mass, lines up with this line right here. This other leg is just sort of floating. It's kind of there for balance, and it's resting essentially. And then of course when this person gets tired of standing on one leg, they'd shift their weight to the other, and then the other leg would be shifting. But in that process, parts of the body seem to change. Like one of the shoulders drops, the other one goes higher, and one of the hips is higher and the other one drops. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean you're going to get a true contrapposto pose in your drawing this week, but it's just something to keep in mind. The sort of like the physical presence of gravity on a human being and how they carry their weight. And a lot of times that can be just identified with a straight line that goes up and down. And also taking note of how these how the shoulders go at different angles, or the hips may be carried in different ways. Okay, so that's it for the primer. Of course, that was kind of a quick one just to sort of get you ready for this. There are dedicated figure drawing classes, and in fact, that's something that if you enjoy this, I recommend looking into as your next drawing class next semester. If you really find yourself wanting more of a challenge, it uses a lot of the same things that we already know, but it applies it to the challenging aspect or the challenging subject matter of the human body. Okay,